Welcome everybody to Tab BizSense. Today we are honored to have three very distinguished panelists with us talking about cybersecurity. Let me introduce myself first. I am Blair Koch here with Tab Denver West. Also with us is Bob Dodge and Gina Beckman. And what I am going to do is I am going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves. We have Anson Thompson, Antonio Wint, and Stig Ravdal. So Anson, why don't you get us started?
Yeah, thank you, Blair. Honored to be here. When people ask me what I do, I say I am five things. First, I am a father. I am a lover. I'm a writer. I'm a teacher, and I own a small business. And it just so happens that our small business does have a focus in cyber risk management. Take it away, Stig.
All right. Well, that's a hard act to follow, but I'll try. I've gotten better. This guy's taught me a few things. So I'm a father to four amazing kids, 2019 and 5 and 4. I got a couple of little ones. Husband to an amazing creative lady and commercial pilot from Brazil. I'm originally from Norway, and I spent my childhood in East Africa. I came to the US to go to school in 1992 and ended up with a Master's of Science in Ecology. So therefore, I have a company running cybersecurity gigs basically for small and medium-sized businesses. And I've been doing cybersecurity since about 1996. We help small and mid-sized organizations meet the challenge of protecting their business from cyber threats. Boom. How's that, Bob?
Antonio.
Hello, my name is Antonio Wint. I am the owner and CEO of SynActFin, Networking Computer Services. We also go by SAF, so you don't have to say SynActFin. We are a managed IT service provider based in Denver, Colorado. It's our company goal to help your business use IT to gain or maintain a competitive advantage. I founded SAF in 2001 based on the methodologies and approaches used by large corporations to successfully manage information and technology. I've lived in Colorado since the age of 7. I attended Montbello High School, who recently won the state championship in football. Go Warriors. And I attended Colorado State University. Go Rams.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. Thrilled to have you here. So, cutting right to the chase, you hear it in the news all the time. You cannot miss it. Hearing about companies getting attacked, cyber threats, getting your personal information. And usually what you hear about, though, is the big companies, right? The big names that we all know. What you don't hear about is the small to mid-sized businesses that get hacked, they get held for ransom, and it really messes them up for days on end. It is significant, it is serious, it is highly disruptive. So today we're going to talk about what's going on out there and how you can best protect yourself, right, from something that's completely out of your control to a certain extent. So I'm going to start with a question. And oh, by the way, feel free to put questions in the chat. We will allow some time at the end for some Q&A with our amazing panelists. So here's the first question. I'm going to start with you, Stig. Please share some recent statistics or a story about cybersecurity incidents and their impact to small business and financial, emotional, etc.
Sure. So I kind of looked around for incidents that were in the media. And what you might notice is that there aren't that many published incidents of the smaller companies in the media. They just tend not to kind of get there. In contrast, you've probably heard of Facebook's breaches, a variety of different things. One Class, Mathaway, these learning platforms. Blue Kai, which does web tracking data. You probably haven't even heard of them, but they're an Oracle company. Ubiquity, which some of you actually may use. It's technology that probably, some of you have as part of your infrastructure, on and on and on. And these are very large breaches, in the many, many millions to 500 million to billion. Why I bring them up is they have downstream effects. They really affect the smaller businesses because so many of the people in your companies use these same services or involved in those services. And the real sort of the problem with these kinds of breaches is that often passwords are released. Just as an example or related to that, there was a collection of database or passwords, they typically called it comb, of 3.2 billion user IDs and passwords that were released just in March. And those are from these common breaches that you often hear about. The problem is that data is then used to potentially attack the platforms that you use, whether you're in Office 365, you might use Box or Dropbox or things of that nature. Your users, your staff, people that use the technology that you depend on may very well have been caught up in these breaches. And depending on how you do your security, you may be affected by that, or some of your users may have their accounts compromised. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get in. Just a couple other things. I don't know if there's any companies in California, but the DMV and the state controller's office was breached. So if you guys have employees or operate in California, you may have been affected by that. And then you probably heard of the oil pipeline breach that occurred recently. Again, not a small business. They're not typically very big businesses in the oil sector, but big enough, obviously in billions and whatnot. But where it affects us is sort of downstream effects. So anyone operating on the East Coast may have felt that energy hit, whether they're in manufacturing or construction or somehow are affected by oil or have customers, who knows, someone might be in the gas station business. So you have sort of those downstream effects as well. I'll talk a little bit more once we get into some other topics around kind of the small business aspect, but the biggest challenge really is when you guys are hit by these things, it doesn't end up in the news anymore. In March, there were in April, there were 141 breaches, 153 in March, 88 in February, and some 53 in January. That's just this year. And those were all, 25 million accounts or more. So yeah, we don't even make the news, obviously.
Thank you. Thank you. Antonio.
Yeah, first let's explain ransomware, because I've actually found that some people don't understand what ransomware is. Ransomware is when a bad actor uses the native encryption tool in your computer to encrypt your computer and lock you out of it so that you can't have access to your data. So it's pretty crafty. It's actually ingenious. I'm going to use your computer against you. The idea behind that is I encrypt your data, and then you have to pay me a fee in crypto coin in order for me to decrypt your data. The number of organizations that paid the ransom increased from 26% in 2020 to 32% in 2021, although fewer than 1 in 10 or 8% managed to get all of their data back. That's important because paying the ransom is not a good plan for your business. You're not going to get your data back. 54% of businesses say cyber attacks are too advanced for their IT team to handle them on their own. That's important because don't be ashamed or embarrassed to say, I don't get it, I don't understand this, I need help from a professional to help deal with cyber attacks. Here's a key stat. The number of organizations that experience data encryption as the result of significant ransomware attacks actually fell from 73% in 2020 to 51% in 2021. What that means is the ransomware attacks are now more laser focused. They're not necessarily just shooting it all over the place. They're saying, let's attack that company and go after that amount of money. So it's decreased, but the impact is still very, very high. Another important thing is there's now extortion that's going on. So extortion without encryption is on the rise. And what happens with extortion is they actually get access to your data in your systems and steal your data, but they don't encrypt it and say, you must pay a ransom or we're going to expose your data to the dark web, which can lead to a ransomware attack. All interesting information and all interesting stats that we're trying to, as a managed service provider, protect your business from.
Scary. Thank you. Anson, how about some stories and stats from you?
Yeah, so my space here today is risk management, so commercial insurance. So if you own a business, I'm going to talk about cyber insurance. Some stats right now. Average cost of a cyber attack in 2020 is $3.9 million. 60% of all small businesses go under within 6 months of a cyber breach. Average ransomware cost is about $231,000, to Antonio's point. And there's some common expenses from data breach, which include business interruption, ransom demands, regulatory fines and penalties, likely potential for litigation for customers and clients, and finally, your reputation may take a hit. The other coverage line you might want to think about is directors and officers. Sometimes there's bleed over from a cyber liability into the D&O. So it's important to have cyber liability insurance. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Thank you.
Wow. Very scary, quite honestly. All right, so Antonio, let's start this question, and Stig, I'm going to have you follow him. From a technology perspective, what can owners do to protect their organization, and what are the trade-offs and the costs, right? I mean, nothing's perfect, right? So what are the various options and the good and the bad? Thanks.
Yeah, and obviously from a business standpoint, you want to be able to run your business. From an IT standpoint, we want it to be the most secure thing on the planet. So there's that balance between we have to be able to use the systems and it needs to be secure. There's no silver bullet for this. It's a system or a bunch of tools that work together to and methodologies to protect your environment. You should assume you will get hit. You should implement a zero trust policy, trust no one, everyone's a bad guy. Even your managed services provider, there should be something within your organization that it protects you from your MSP having a data breach or somehow exposing you to ransomware. Make backups and keep a copy offline. Backups are the main method organizations are using to recover from a ransomware attack. You should use the company industry standard called 321. There should be 3 sets of backups using 2 different types of media, and 1 should be kept offline. What we found with ransomware is people are leaving them online, and the ransomware actually encrypts the backup. So they can't restore the backup without paying the ransom. And so that's why you got to pull it offline. You want to use a layered approach to protecting your network. The layers should be things like protected DNS, firewalling, antivirus, ransomware protection, malware protection, user training, automated backups. All those work together as a system to decrease your likelihood of having to pay a ransom for a ransomware attack. Again, the user training is really, really important. Humans being trained actually has been one of the reasons why ransomware or malware attempts and hacks have been prevented. You may recall there was an attack in Florida where someone tried to take over the water system and dump chemicals into the water. That was actually stopped because a trained technician saw the gauges going the wrong way and halted the attack and found out someone was actually in the system. So the human factor is still important with technology. Another thing is we don't pay the ransom. Don't pay the ransom. It actually makes you a mark on the internet, and they're saying, hey, we're going to go after those guys more often because they do pay the ransom. Additionally, only 2/3 of your information is probably going to get restored if you pay the ransom. And lastly, I would recommend you have to have a malware recovery plan, some sort of plan in place that you're going to implement if something happens. It's already a part of your incident response plan. It's already thought about. And if something happens, you just execute the plan.
Fabulous. Thank you. Stig, same question.
Yeah, so I'll kind of jump on and add to what Antonio was saying. I like to look at it from the business perspective. So what are the data that you're trying to protect, and then from whom and how long? So if you kind of think about what is it that you have that someone could either make unavailable to you or compromise, take from you and sell. And you can probably bucket it into things like your own human resources, meaning employees and those kinds of things. If you have customer information, that's usually what's valuable. If you have any sort of association in finance or you're taking credit cards, that's its own implication. But if you think about the data and what someone could, take or take it away from you, how would that affect your organization? I like to look at things sort of practically. And if you think about the types of attacks out there, what we're seeing the most of are ransomware attacks, wire fraud attacks, data breach of users, so user databases, if you will, are being stolen. And then account compromises that are really just a way to get typically these other attacks started, phishing and whatnot. So if you start looking at what are some of the solutions that would protect you from that, and then to Antonio's point, have a disaster recovery plan. And we talk about that just in a little bit, so I won't spend a lot of time on it, but really, assess whether or not you can recover. If you've got that backup, that ransomware question becomes really simple. We're going to figure out how to shut this guy out, and then we're going to restore. If you don't have a backup you have confidence in, it changes the game, and you're going to be playing that sort of, do we pay or not, because I'm terrified that I'll lose my data, can't restore my systems. And then unfortunately, like Antonio said, many times you don't get it back. They kind of, like your ransom movies, they don't release where the victim actually is, and off they go with the money, and people aren't happy, and so on and so forth. It's not so different. The other thing is that they're often doing a two-for attack, which is one, you'll pay for that ransom and get your stuff back, and then they sell your data anyway. There's no loyalty, right? Crime doesn't have any loyalty, and it's really the same here. So unfortunately, you're up against some tough characters, but have strategies. I also like to look at, have you done the basics with cybersecurity? So for example, you probably have a firewall if you have an environment that requires it. Many of these small businesses that I think that we interact with in our boards probably use online services. So you probably don't have a firewall around, whatever it is, QuickBooks Online or whatnot. You're going to depend on them for those kinds of services. But you have laptops out there or desktops. Make sure there's good endpoint protection on there. User awareness is critical. This is how most of these breaches occur, is by trying to craft, some sort of phishing message that someone will click on. So, put some emphasis on user awareness. Multi-factor, I can't say this enough. User ID and password is just not good enough. I mean, you may as well leave the key in the door to make it easier for the guy breaking in, because that's essentially what you got with a user ID and password. So use that key, leave the key in the door or take it with you, who cares? It's a silly key. I do lock picking too, and it takes me about a minute and a half to get through a regular house lock. Probably I can get better down about 30 seconds when I try, but it's super easy to get into a house. It's super easy to get into a system with user ID and password as well. So add that second factor of authentication, and it's so easy to do these days. It's cheap or free, just do it. Remote access, make sure that's secure. Nothing should be no two-factor authentication for remote access. And then you can kind of get into some other things. But I think if you can get those 3-4 things done, then you can start going down the next sort of set of controls, if you will. It's about maturity. Most organizations, I'm guessing in TAB, don't really have a strategic plan. I kind of chuckle at this because this is what I do for a living. I help organizations plan this out. And then I came to TAB and I said, I don't have a plan for finances. I don't have a plan for sales. I don't have this, and that's what I'm getting from TAB. And that's, I provide that in cybersecurity. But if you think about it, probably many of your organizations out there don't have a lot of this stuff. No plan per se. You're reacting to what's coming at you, or, hey, we need more copiers, we need more printers, we need more computers. And, oh, we got hit by something, let's react to it. If you can take some of that TAB learning that we do around maybe exit planning, let's say, then, apply it to your IT and security. And then let's see, outsource whatever you can. You're probably doing that anyway by using everything from Canva to Dropbox to PandaDocs or whatever, right? You're outsourcing services. Outsource as much as you can so that it becomes someone else's problem. Make it Antonio's throat that you choke instead of your own IT people, because he's gonna cover his bases anyway. But figure out someone that can do it, and that's all they do, and then you can focus on your business. And then the last thing, we talked about instant response plan, have a plan, and then cyber insurance. And Anson will talk a little bit more about that, but that's actually a really good strategy. It's sort of part of your quiver, if you will, of cybersecurity. That's it.
Can I add one other thing to that? Another thing is your business network is not your home network. Don't treat them the same. I get a lot of customers that are saying, well, I can do this at home, but why can't I do it at my office? And I want to do this at my office, and why can't I play Xbox there? And Xbox doesn't work, and streaming services, they're completely different. So treat your business like the business network. Don't do gaming and personal things on it. Your home network, you can use it for all that stuff. And I like to say, Stig, not throat to choke, person to hug once we do so well for your
Oh, that's good.
Yes, the one person to hug when everything goes great.
It's kind of like someone could get hit by the bus. I like to say they could win the lottery and you'd still lose them. But yeah,
there you go.
Excellent. Thank you. So we've heard about some technologies. Anson, why don't you talk to us about insurance, what Stig was alluding to there?
Yeah, thank you. So most business owners buy property insurance, they buy general liability, commercial auto, excess, and all of those forms are standardized. And when it comes to cyber liability, you have to understand that no form is equal. Okay. And so if you purchase cyber insurance, one of the things we recommend is you get a side-by-side comparison between the forms, and you'll see what this policy covers and what this one does not. In the insurance world, there's two types of cyber. There's little boy cyber and there's big boy cyber. Most insurance agencies slap on a small little endorsement, cost you $250, and they tell you you have cyber. But those little boy policies cover very little, usually just $50,000 for monitoring. A lot of times in our cases, we'll say, here's the little boy, but we always recommend a big boy option. It's much more expensive, and we'll talk about pricing a little bit later. But one of the things the big boy policies do is they actually have ransomware, and they actually pay the ransom in cryptocurrency. Now, we've had some claims in our agency where we did pay the ransom and we got our data back. So it's a little bit different experience than the other two guys have had. But I will say that if you don't have insurance, then that's a dicey situation. The other thing is a major claim right now is something called WTF. You guys know what WTF stands for? Wire transfer fraud. Okay, huge deal. And depending on the policy, you may have $1 million limit, 5 million, $250,000 sub limit, but it's very important to find a broker, it's a risk manager that really understands this, because it's a little bit more complex than selling, coverage to a coffee shop. I mean, this is pretty important stuff. So that's it.
Excellent. So as we've heard, there's lots of different mechanisms that you should be putting in place to better protect yourself. So this next question is for all three of you, and I'll say it again in a few minutes, but please share with us a situation where you had a client get hacked, and what did they remediate? What happened? How was it handled? Where were they protected? Where were they not? So let's go ahead and start with you, Antonio, and then we'll go Anson and then Stig.
Awesome. Well, actually, that's perfect, because the WTF, this is actually a WTF situation. The leadership for this particular business entity was not following our recommendations on password policies and encryption and password changing and all the things. So a bad actor compromised a person's email account in the accounting department and monitored email flow communications for months. We tracked it back to about 2 months that they were in the system and tracking it. We knew this because the bad actor was coming in from Africa. And we saw an African IP address and know that the people that were in this organization were not coming in from Africa. They then constructed an email and sent a transfer of funds request from the CFO to an account payment for an account payment. So the CFO said, hey, can you guys pay this account? The person responded and said, yes, sir, I'll get on that right away. The CFO responded, I did not send that email. Stop, right? It looked official because it was official. It turned out the CFO's email account was hacked, and the people were actually emailing the way he emails from the system. It was only stopped because obviously the person replied. It was a really big deal within the organization. Obviously, we were pulled in. From that point forward, they started to listen to our recommendations. What we implemented for them was we implemented a password tool that's a cloud directory service that makes sure that they have complex passwords. We also required MFA, multi-factor authentication or two-factor authentication, to make sure someone could not get into someone's email unless they had a code as well. And lastly, which is really important because there's a lot of times we try to solve problems with just technology. We also implemented a vocal approval process for wire transfers over a certain amount. So meaning, even if someone sends you an email that says do this, or you get a digital information that says do this, you have to call them and confirm you're telling me to wire 6 digits to this account, correct? yes, all right, cool, that's approved. And then they move forward. So yes, that was very tough situation for the owner and the business, but now they trust us when it comes to security and following the procedures that we put in place.
Thank you. Anson.
Yeah, one Friday night, about a year ago, I get a call from a client, 9:30 at night, answer the phone 24/7, 365. And he said, I don't think I bought this, but owns a manufacturing facility. And he said, we came in this morning and everything was locked down. So to Antonio's point, a bad actor had hacked into their system, shut their manufacturing facility down. They asked for $500,000. And I told the gentleman that night, I said, you know what, I can't recall. I don't think you did purchase that, but let me go back. And so Saturday morning, we got into his file and found out that we had offered the big boy cyber that would have paid the ransom, but he had opted for little boy cyber. And so immediately we write a check for $50,000. Within 6 months, per the stats, the gentleman was out of business. And he now says that he wished he would have bought that policy that was $2,500 versus $250. We had offered it, but again, being price conscious, we're not in a society anymore. You cannot afford not to have cyber insurance. It's important to have somebody like Stig. It's very important to have Antonio, but you have to have a risk manager that can, and when you get hacked, and you will, be able to either pay the money or work to recover that data by paying these other two guys.
Thanks.
I like to say that there are two kinds of people out there. Those that know that they've been hacked, and those that think they haven't. Listen to those words carefully. Everybody gets hacked. It's almost impossible to keep someone out. And kind of, Antonio's experience there is one of the most common methods that they get into someone's email. I can't say enough. Use two-factor authentication. Don't allow remote access. Strong passwords, honestly, aren't the biggest thing anymore. We recommend really long password and easy passwords to remember, because my guys, we hack passwords and it takes us, hours to break passwords, even that are quote unquote strong. The problem is you get those passwords and there's some advanced techniques that are actually simple to use that allow us to sort of bypass even the strongest password. And really the only thing that stops that is the two-factor authentication. But what happens when they get into your email system is that they do exactly what Antonio described. They email from the account of a person that has the authority to say, hey, transfer, so much money. A variant of that attack is called the Doppelganger attack, where they've compromised both accounts. And what they do then is they sit and monitor that for the response, and they delete the response before it's received by the actual person. And so they can sort of jump into the conversation from both sides. And we've seen this happen within organizations, and we've seen it happen between two different organizations. We had an engineering firm, and they were basically about to pay a bill, and they produce big, expensive equipment. And so they had a bill for, I think it was $23 million that they owed a contractor. And the perpetrators were able to jump into that conversation, say, hey, oh, by the way, our banking information has changed. Can you update your records? That came from the people that are supposed to receive the money about 2 weeks prior to the payment being due. And then they jumped in, about the time the payment was due and said, hey, where's that payment? And made sure it went out. This went unnoticed for about 2 weeks. And by that time, the payment had been moved from the originating bank that it was sent to, which was a little bank in, I think, Idaho, onto 5 other banks, really spread across the US and then overseas. And that's a typical method. And unfortunately, banks aren't really that helpful. They might see this sort of stuff, but they don't necessarily red flag it. They're getting a little bit better, the bigger banks are, but they're not really super helpful. So time is of the essence with these things. We've worked on 4 different kinds of attacks this year. Ransomware on a medical record system, where basically it was a port that was sitting open on the internet. It was a third-party managed system, and it got completely shut down. We had a marketing campaign with one of our clients where an attacker got into their system and tried to basically solicit their customers onto a different platform from within their systems. And then we had, actually a few different incidents of the email accounts, that were compromised. And then we had a bank service organization that had a wire transfer fraud that was also caught kind of by accident, just like Antonio describes. Those wire transfer or wire fraud countermeasures are really important things. We call it like missile key approach. You need two people to launch this rocket or make that payment happen. And it can't be by email. It has to be by voicemail. You call someone up and get a positive confirmation. I've worked with businesses where they do so many transactions that becomes cumbersome. So we can work with you to figure out other, things. In all of these cases, what I'll tell you is, unlike the movies, it's an agonizingly slow process to deal with an incident. So you think that we sort of, put on our smoke jumping suits, come, jumping in with parachutes and equipment and heavy gear, and boom, 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 yeah, we're ready to take this on. No, it's all right, let's take 2 weeks to get a SOW in place so we can do anything at all. Let's go look at what logs you have. Oh, you don't have those logs? We can't figure out where they came from. We can't do this, we can't do that. More often than not, it's hard to actually figure out what happened. And so we do our best, but what we typically find is that companies don't log all the information they should. The logs are maybe cycled or rotated. So if you think about busy firewalls, they often will basically have sort of first in, first out type logging setup. They're not archiving the logs, so you can actually go back and see what happened. And by the time you discover what the incident is, you might be too far along to really determine what happened and where it came from. If the event is ongoing, you might figure out that, oh yeah, we see an IP address across the world, kind of like Antonio described, in Africa, and you can do some geolocation and you can deduce that that's, likely where they're coming from. But more often than not, we're not able to, with great confidence, say exactly what happened. And so what happens next then is that you kind of go into recovery mode. An incident is a lot like a disaster. So you've had an outage, whether it's ransomware or a compromised system. And then once you've fixed that, put out the fire, so to speak, you're in recovery mode. And at that point in time, you're kind of praying that we figured it out. We figured out what the problem was, and we shut this person out, and they're not going to come back. And hopefully, if you can't determine whether it happened or not, hopefully they didn't take any data. But this is also kind of a guessing game. And I've had many conversations with executives about, do we notify that we've had a breach? If they're in healthcare, let's say, you're supposed to be notifying patients, and there's this presumed sort of presumed breach if anyone unauthorized has touched your systems. The HIPAA regulation essentially thinks that you've had a breach. So it makes it pretty tough on the legal and executive team to kind of figure out what they're going to do. The biggest thing I can say is prepare. Have an incident response plan. Preparing might be having a scope of work with an organization that's already prepared that can come in and help respond to that incident, because most likely you don't have the team and the staff. That cyber insurance policy that Anson sold you, particularly the big boy one, it's going to come with an incident response partner in it. And there's going to be a partner as an underwriter, basically uses a third party that kind of manages the whole thing. Prepare, practice that before you actually need it, so you're not going through that paperwork. I've been on many incident response situations where 3-4 weeks in, someone says, oh, we have cyber insurance and we're supposed to use these guys over here. And that's a bunch of weeks that went by with not necessarily the level of action. They're not 100%. I've very often kind of been put on pause because they had cyber insurance, only to be reactivated once kind of they run out the capabilities of that policy, for the reasons Anson talked about. The more that you need, the more it costs. So anyway, but prepare, have a simple plan to for this kind of stuff, if nothing else.
Thank you. So let's use that. And Anson, you and Antonio, since Steve kind of just answered this, but from a protection perspective, a preparedness perspective, what should you be expecting from your IT person, from your insurance person? And oh, by the way, what can you do? We've talked about training your employees. What can you expect from your employees as well? So what would that look like? Antonio, why don't you get us started, and then Anson.
Yeah, so let's start with your employees. Employees, you should expect them to be going through monthly, at a minimum, cadence security training. They're the number one reasons you're going to get compromised. They start with them first. If you're not doing cybersecurity awareness training, you need to do that immediately. and that your managed services provider, IT provider can help you with that. As Steve mentioned, the incident response plan is critical as well. You should not have to be in a fire and thinking about how to put it out. You should have a glass, break the glass, open up the incident response plan, run through the plan. It'll tell you exactly what you should do. Is this a real incident or not? Ironically enough, an incident that should have been triggered should have been the pandemic. That was an incident. You should open your incident response plan and say, how do we handle this? It may have actually gotten into your business continuity plan as well, but for sure your incident response plan. Some things that you should look for your incident response plan that should come from your managed services provider, assuming you picked the right plan. There's 6 different phases. There's preparation, which means you're preparing for this incident to happen. You have training, you're equipping your staff, you're practicing. There's identification and detecting and deciding if an incident is really an incident and what's the level that should be happening there. There's containment of the incident, then eradication, then there's a recovery phase, and then you go into the lessons learned. And this is actually a continuous cycle that you're going to do all the time when it comes to the incident response plan. If you think about it, your antivirus software, it goes through those exact same steps, right? You have the tool in place, it identifies a threat. It says, hey, that threat doesn't look good. It contains it on your system so that you can't mess with it. Looks at it a little bit more and says, actually, that's bad. We should delete it or recover the file. So there's an automated portion of this that's going on all the time under the hood with your computer. This is another level within your business that you want to make sure that you have. So you can look to your MSP or an IT professional to get that kind of information.
Thank you. Anson.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we could understand is what would a data breach, not ransomware, not WTF, but what would just a breach cost us? And Blair, I know I included in my notes a link to a data breach calculator. So if you have some interest in that, I can send you a link. If your firm got hacked, what would that cost? You can get an idea of what your exposure is. Regarding employees, that's where we have the major problems. And it comes down to education. And as Stig has said, I think 18 times, double factor authentication. Very, very important. If your company is not using it, probably going to charge you a little bit more for your cyber insurance. It is a big, big tool that can thwart some of those attacks that we see. A lot of times when you purchase cyber insurance, as Antonio mentioned, there's training that goes along with that. So make sure you utilize and your broker shares with you what is available. And then finally, some managed services providers actually do phishing attacks. So they actually try to attack. And then if the employee makes a mistake and says, I need to reset my Amazon password, then they work with management to say, hey, Betty, don't do that. So and I'm sure everybody's doing something like that, but work, it's a triage, right? So Stig's got cybersecurity, Antonio's managed a service provider, and we're the third-party risk management service. Those 3 should probably be working together, build a team, and then get protected. And that's it.
Yeah, I think, Antonio, you covered kind of the, how to handle a hack pretty darn well, so I won't really spend any time on that. The first part of that question is what to expect from our IT organization. And if you're not working with someone like Antonio and his company or someone like them, then chances are your IT team is not as aware of what cyber threats really are and what controls need to be in place. So really that prevention aspect. Sometimes your IT team is really focused on just keeping the lights on, running your business applications or whatnot, and they're not necessarily strong when it comes to cybersecurity. And so I would say, find someone that can help you there, that can help you figure out, what are your greatest risks? Do you have the right controls in place? And like I mentioned earlier, there's kind of a priority here. If you don't have a firewall and you have a data center or something, that's your number one. If you don't have anything on the endpoint or you have something that really isn't worth its, software doesn't weigh much, but isn't really worth anything, then fix that problem, so on and so forth. And that's typically something that someone else that has that expertise and knowledge can help you with. But yeah, your IT team, are not typically security experts. And then, yeah, I think we covered everything else there. Thanks.
Cool. Anson, I put a link in the chat. I don't think it's the calculator though, so I'll let you update that for me. So here's my final question, and then we'll go into some Q&A, and we have some other questions out there. So we've talked about disaster recovery, and you should have one. What if you had to give people like 3 specific things they could do? What would they be? And even a range of what the cost might be would be super helpful. Anson.
First of all, don't reinvent the wheel. If you're a business owner, this is probably the 18th cybersecurity program that you have joined. And that's good because it changes almost weekly. Most providers have disaster recovery plans already developed. I sent one to Antonio. He goes, man, that's from 2015, probably needs to be updated, but yet there's a template you can then take to your MSP and say, here's a start, help us finish this. So that'd be the 2 thing. And then educate, triage the risk management with cybersecurity and the managed services provider.
Thank you. Stig.
I would say if you don't have a disaster recovery or a business continuity plan, then that's really where you need to start. Kind of think about how do you recover your business. We do this as a service, so we'll come in and help, larger organizations figure that out. But as a smaller organization, start thinking about the systems that would, cause you the most pain if they were down. A cybersecurity incident is really just a special case of a disaster. So a fire takes out your systems. Well, ransomware does too. And so once you've kind of responded through your insurance provider or through a company that you've hired as a retainer, you're really into recovery mode. But if you haven't gone through recovery mode, if you haven't figured that stuff out, then that's really your first problem. The other part is, for most of us, it's really about continuity of operations or business continuity. So disaster recovery, if you will, is focused on how do I get my technology working again, whereas business continuity is how do I continue operating when my technology is not available, or for how long can I operate before I have to do something else. Thinking through that helps you decide, where to invest time and money. It costs to make things redundant and so on and so forth. And so, that really helps with that. Now, I will say probably for most of us, we use a lot of services that are online. And so the complexity of these things are not necessarily what they were when you had it in the data center. But yeah, I would say plan, test your plan, prepare, and go through some tabletop exercises where you say, hey, such and such a system is no longer available. What do we do? Do we have any sort of manual workarounds or paper-based, quote unquote, workarounds that we can use?
Well, as Stig mentioned, we've moved from disaster recovery more to business continuity. Think about it in those and that's the frame of reference. The object of the game is to maintain business critical functions for as long as possible, not just during a disaster recovery, or a crisis, but afterwards as well. When we're working with a client, we're looking at 2 things when we're building out a solution: something called RTO, which is recovery time objective, and RPO, recovery point objective. And we build a solution based on those numbers. So recovery time objective would be you saying, I have to be back up within 24 hours, okay? Recovery point objective would be, at what point on the time frame can we go back to? Meaning, you want it recovered back within 2 hours, 2 days, a week? And then we build a solution based on that. The closer the recovery time objective and recovery point objective are to ground zero, usually the more expensive the solution is going to be, because it costs time, it costs money to get you to that point. Once you're building out a business continuity plan, and they are extensive, I would say there's one thing that I think is you should focus on. Critical business functions and their dependencies are important. When you're going through your business continuity plan, what do we need to operate this business, even on a skeleton level? And then what are the dependencies? What is connecting to that? So we can still operate the business. I believe with the pipeline disaster, I have yet to confirm, that the attack was on the billing system. meaning they could supply the oil through the pipeline, but they didn't know how much to charge anyone for anything. So they had to stop everything. That is a business critical function that should have been identified. It's this has to be recovered to this point in time, and this is how quickly it needs to be recovered so that they can continue to operate the pipeline. Again, business continuity plans are extensive, and take your time with them, do it right. You'll do it with a team, your security expert, your managed services provider, your key stakeholders internally, and your insurance provider should all be included.
Thank you. Let me just do something really quick. I'll ask you guys to humor me. So everyone close your eyes. Take a deep breath. Now think about every single day in your business, every time you touch an electronic device, computer, phones, anything. Now imagine that you can't access it, or what you're accessing is not yours. Can open your eyes. Pretty scary. We've heard lots of stories and statistics today. I do want to do a follow-up question, Antonio, for you, and then we're going to open it up to other questions. So earlier on, Antonio, you mentioned multiple backup techniques. Can you go a little bit deeper and like what are some of those options for the multiple backups? I know we had one offline, two local. What does that look like?
Yeah, so there's lots of different levels of backups. I'm sure you've heard the whole, people don't use tape anymore. Usually we're backing up to in other ways. You would back up to a local storage. So let's say a full disk backup, a full image backup where you can restore a system from a complete disaster locally, but then you should also store that offsite, okay? So you have one copy local, another copy that's sent offsite, and then we would also recommend that you do something for file level backup and cloud backup. What a lot of people don't know is Office 365 and G Suite, they guarantee you only a little bit of time, usually 30 to 60 days, where they'll allow you to restore data. If you have something where someone's in your system for months and then delete data and you don't know what's going on, you should have a cloud recovery tool or cloud backup tool as well. That cloud backup tool should back it up outside of the platform that is used in the cloud. So G Suite, Office 365, SharePoint. Again, you want to think multiple layers when you're talking about security. My mentor told me, you're awesome at IT, but never forget you are only as good as your backups. And that has saved me so many times. Just think about that as a business owner as well.
Thank you. If you have any questions, please put them into the chat. We'll start addressing those. In the meantime, let me ask the three of you another question, and that is, what do you expect to start? I know nobody has a crystal ball, but moving forward, what are some of the types of things that we might see from hackers? Stig?
Oh, sorry. Let me go down here. So here are a couple of things that I put together around that. Basically, we're going to see more and more sort of the pray and spray attacks, meaning there's broad targeting and everyone kind of gets caught up. I think we're all targets for someone out there, in part because you can lease a ransomware solution and even have a consultant that helps you set it up and run it and everything like that. And the guys who run this stuff are sort of the big hackers that you might have heard about 5-7 years ago that now have decided that they can monetize this by creating platforms. So I think we're just going to see more and more of that. And then as software continues to sort of eat the world, there are just more ways for the bad guys to get into our stuff. We're going to get more and more dependent on technology. And so there are more ways that someone can really kind of get into your technology. And I think for small businesses in particular, it gets challenging to kind of keep your eyes on everything, particularly when nothing is really in your own office or data center anymore. A lot of it's really online, whether you're using, I mentioned a few things, but QuickBooks Online to HubSpot or Pipedrive or, Salesforce or whatever it is, so much of the stuff that we use as small businesses tend to be online. and you're now depending on security systems and controls that you probably don't have a lot of visibility into. Would you know if someone logged into any of your systems out there that aren't managed by you? That's where that two-factor authentication comes in again. Cybercrime is very profitable. Expect this industry to grow, and keep in mind that the number of these sort of cloaked guys with sunglasses on that look all, you know, kind of nasty that you see in movies and cartoons, they are the few, and the businesses, cybersecurity criminal businesses, are the ones that really are doing all of this. It's a for-profit motive. A friend of mine works for a gaming company, and they've gone and visited the attacker that attacks them on a regular basis. And it's a 4-story building in China. It's got an administration HR level. It's got a level that hacks their gaming code. It has a different level that operates their game in China, and has a third level that basically is working within the game to create, you know, stuff that they can monetize on their side and drive people over to their game. And it's a business. These people wear suits and go to work 9 to 5 just on Chinese time. And that's really what's going to happen in the future. Harm equals dollars. The more harm I can put on you, the more likely you're going to pay. And of course, money's in data. So I would expect that. AI is here to stay, and bad guys are usually better at developing software than the good guys. I'll just let you know that.
Thank you. Antonio, anything to add to that in terms of crystal ball moments?
Yeah, actually, that's a perfect lead in. From my training, I see automation, AI, and machine learning. At some point, the hackers are going to get so good at this that you're actually going to be getting attacked by a machine. It's going to be automated. And it's not even a person. They're just going to program it. This is what we're looking for, and it's going to go after it. On the other hand, I also see the security efforts from our side also becoming more AI and more machine learning. So if you could think of Terminator, you know, and the end is coming and all that stuff. Yeah, like that's where we're headed. Hopefully we put enough controls in place and air gaps in place so it doesn't become a national security event, but machine learning and AI are definitely the future.
Thank you. Anson.
Yeah, think about how the world's changed in the last 18 months. We used to go to an office, we're able to lock the office down, everything's, you know, secure and all that. And then one day we put everybody home. And so you think about the security that one of your staff members might have on their PC at home, but then think about the child that needs to use that PC occasionally and the things that they're going to click on. So going back to the education, I think it's huge to make sure that the employees know you have to have security, hire a very, very fine IT firm to manage that. From an insurance standpoint, understand the insurance for cyber liability costs are going up. For a normal average business today, we're looking at 10 to 30 point increases. For a managed services provider, you should look at a 50% increase. If you're paying 10K premium for your product right now, you're probably going to pay 20 at renewal. Know that this stuff, and that's because of all the attacks. So we're paying out more claims, thus we're going to have to charge more premium.
Heart sinking. Okay, we have a question from Rick Peebles. Rick, why don't you unmute yourself and ask your question, please?
Okay, I think this will work. This is kind of for Antonio, IT company. What would happen if you got hacked?
That's a very good question. And we have risk mitigation against that. We have cyber insurance to cover that. It is a real threat. So your managed services provider has access to all the keys to your kingdom. And additionally, the tool that they put on your asset that they're using to manage it has direct access to your system. So we have a number of controls that we put in place based on our audit. We are SOC 2 Type 2 audited every year to make sure that we are following the best practices in the industry. We have multiple layers of multi-factor and firewalls and all the things to make sure that we're protecting your network. If there was an incident where we actually caused your data breach or caused a ransomware attack through our tools, our insurance would cover it and our team would fix the solution. And also, you have to understand we're managing your environment. So you're using multi-factor authentication. You have good backups. You have a firewall. So we can actually roll you back. That's a very good question. And everyone should be thinking about that when doing business with the managed services provider.
So to expand on that, Antonio, if one of your providers that you work with was hacked, they got into your system and all of your clients were then compromised, would your insurance cover that?
Yes, it would. We have very expensive insurance. And like Anson said, it keeps going up because we have to assume a lot of risk there. It's a challenge, but it's a necessary evil in what we do.
Thank you.
Yes.
I just wanted to add to that question or Antonio's response. And I think, Rick, you're asking the right question, but don't let that turn you away from working with an IT managed services company. But make sure you're asking those questions, because we have seen in the last 2 or 3 years these attacks on managed services company, particularly smaller ones, that have then resulted in the breach of their customers, and many, many of them. So the fact that you're asking that is great. And if they don't have a good answer, then go to the next one.
Thank you.
Anson.
Rick, if I can give you a recommendation, your managed IT provider can provide you a certificate of insurance showing exactly what they have. If that's a concern, reach out to them and say, hey, can you give me exactly what you have so I get a little bit more comfortable? And if they're not willing to give that to you, you might want to call Antonio.
Additionally, Rick, for us, we have a SOC 2 audit, and all of the vendors that we're working with and recommend all have a SOC 2 audit. That's another stipulation I think you should put on any sort of agreement that you're doing with the MSP. I want to see their SOC 2s also. That means the antivirus solution, the firewall, the phish threat training solution, all of them should have some sort of audit performance within their environment.
Awesome. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you for that great question, Rick. So here's what we're going to do, because I know that there are other questions out there and we can go so deep on any one topic. I'm going to ask our 3 panelists to do a final, here's who I am, here's how you can get a hold of me, and I'm going to let you guys follow up from there. So Anson, how can people get a hold of you, and any final message?
Any final message is if you do not have or have not had a conversation with your broker about cyber liability insurance, please make that call today. To find me, big LinkedIn guy, Anson Ross Thompson, just go to LinkedIn, type in my name, you'll find me. If you want to connect, I'm more than happy to help you in any way I can. So thank you very much. Thank
you. And Stig has already put his email on there. Antonio's got his website, so check the chat. But Antonio, why don't you give us a final message and how to get a hold of you?
Yeah, this is, I use this analogy with a lot of my clients. Technology is like driving on a highway across the country. Let's say you're going from LA to New York. You plot a course and you start driving, okay? But while you're driving, the road changes, the car changes, and your destination is changing. The internet is not static. It is changing while we're using it. So you have to adapt to change and embrace the change and understand what you may have learned 2 months ago is no longer accurate, okay? You can reach us online. Our website is getsimpleIT.com. You can also check me out on LinkedIn. If you're on Comcast networks, you can look for our commercial that's actually running on Comcast as well. So there's plenty of ways for you to find us.
Cool, thank you, Stig.
I put my contact information first wrong and then corrected it. But yeah, LinkedIn or email or get through our website, they all work. I would also suggest that through Tab, we do have a forum area. And if there was any sort of interest, we could certainly start kind of a message board there around these kinds of questions and kind of continue the conversation there. And that way it's sort of kept there for everybody to see. That'd be one other option. But I think like Antonio, like Anson, I love talking about this kind of stuff. So feel free to reach out. There's a lot of free advice that comes just because I'm very passionate about this particular topic. So don't be shy.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Anson, Antonio, Stig. Super powerful conversation. Every time I hear about this, and I did some prep, I mean, it's just a scary world out there. So we have to take the ownership and the responsibility to protect ourselves as best you can. Thank you, Stig, for promoting Tab and our technology. Really appreciate that. For Tab members, thank you. We will continue these conversations. If you're not a Tab member, please feel free to reach out at tabdenverwest.com, and we will be happy to help you. Thanks again, everybody. We will see you next month to talk about some really important HR things in terms of Family Medical Leave Act. See you soon.
Thank you, Blair.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone, for attending.
Thanks all.